Yeah.
What do we have next on our list here?
We have
faith
health
communities.
care and health issues. So in Western North Carolina, um, I think that one of the table settings for this conversation, I think for me, is the fact that the Phoenix Transgender Support Group, it's the longest continuous running transgender support group, one of the longest continuous running support groups in the world. We're the longest continuous running one on the East Coast for sure. I think there's one on the West Coast that's got us beat, so we're I think top two. Not that anybody's counting, and not that I'm one that likes hierarchy particularly, but that has an impact on the community, right? And it attracts people. That's how I got to Asheville.
Okay.
Was because I knew that there are people who were here who are transgender. So we have probably more trans people per capita than your average small town, and probably larger than many major metropolitan areas. Although I think that with the attention that's come in from the general media and generations that are more open-minded and more free-thinking and more creative than ones that have preceded them are rising, that we're seeing more and more people identifying as transgender and under the transgender umbrella. And I believe that that's because there's a better spread of information where people know how to access what they need. So for healthcare, when I got to the area, there were some trans folks around. It was primarily trans women, and I wanted to find some resources for trans guys. So the couple guys who were here didn't really have solid connections in this community, and they were still sort of using stuff outside of it, or one who's just somebody I continually admire and who is quite a story of resilience and perseverance, would go to Mayhack because he thought his position is that it's up to him to train the emerging doctors on how to care for trans people. I was like, that's awesome. I'm glad you can do that. That is not for me. I don't need to train people in that way. I feel like I need to train people in other ways now, but that's another story. Basically, calling around random offices, there was just huge gatekeeping going on. There wasn't a good way to figure out whether somebody ever had interacted with a trans person. And it's all word of mouth, as it is in many communities for trans folks, just word of mouth, who's treating us. And back then it was not whether they're treating us well, whether we're getting competent care, certainly not whether we were getting affirming health care, but whether we could access, hormones, whether we could find a surgeon, that sort of thing. So Transmission, which is an organization that I was involved in starting back in 2001, started to compile lists of people who were seeing the community. And we still maintain that list for Western North Carolina to this day. It had been a vision of ours to do a wider, larger list, but there wasn't a whole lot of funding back in the early 2000s that would go to transgender-focused only organizations to do that sort of work. Today's a different day and age, and there's more monies available for that sort of thing. There's other organizations that have sprung up and taken some good starts at that. So that's a nice thing. But my point in all of this is that we got to a place in, I want to say probably about 2006, where we had some folks who were beginning to access health care at Western North Carolina Community Health Services. Winches, that's the shorthand, winches, which is very funny because it sounds like wenches, but winches realized that, hey, this is an underserved population, and hey, these folks need help accessing proper care. And there were some issues there in the beginning. such as, okay, so you can come and access care, but we're not going to allow you to take your hormones with you. We're going to control that, and we're going to make you come back here. So if you take a population that's already struggling to get any kind of health care, and a population that's struggling to get a job and keep a job, to ask somebody to come back weekly or bi-weekly to receive their hormone administration and delivery, that's a lot. And that was just a lot of, in my opinion, gatekeeping fear. And the doctors would not take the introductions that the community offered to them to other doctors who had worked with the trans community for years. I think it's very different there now, and every organization has to grow and change. The other thing that they were doing at the inception of their program was if they had a doctor who called them and said, hey, I've got this patient who's trans, and I'm wanting to treat them. Can you provide some information for us? They would say, oh, just send them over here to us. So that I knew was a huge disservice. And we, again, talked to the trans health services folks over there and said, look, you have no idea the Pandora's box you're opening. There are so many trans people here. If you start telling doctors to just send people in, you're going to get flooded. People aren't going to be able to have the kind of access they need to care. So it's, months and months and months long of waiting lists just to even get your first appointment. If people missed an appointment, they'd have to start all over again. All kinds of access issues sprung up because of that. Not to mention the fact that this was a free and low-cost clinic, and still is, for people who can't afford it. So you would have people, I wish there were more trans people who were very successful and had great jobs, had good insurance, had private doctors or people at private practices. Not trying to be pejorative here, but we all have different accesses to healthcare, and I believe that the low income ones should not be flooded by people who can afford care elsewhere. And that's kind of precisely what happened. So it became known by all the doctors in the area, oh, if you've got a trans person, just send them over to Winches. So since then they've learned their lessons. But it's just a great example of healthcare professionals not listening to communities who know something about who they are, what their needs are, not willing to take the references to others within their own profession for guidance from those people within the community, and really listen to people with experience who have some knowledge. So I think that we're seeing now, we do have a number of different doctors in and around the area and other specialists who do give competent and affirming health care. Transmission has been training doctors and medical students for a number of years to help provide that kind of care, from everything from how to create a welcoming office environment where people will know they're included, to what your staff does and says, and how you as a front staff person can be welcoming and inclusive, to how you can do charting, to physician introduction and care and resourcing and networking with other professionals. So
I bet that was easy.
oh yeah. Super easy to tell professionals that they need training.
Tell physicians that.
Tell physicians, exactly,
Yeah.
that they're not quite up to snuff.
Interesting.
So that's presented its challenges. So those are some things about Western North Carolina and healthcare and health issues. I think at this point that this is probably one of the number one areas in the country that a trans person, and certainly an LGBTQ person, can access good, competent health care.
Yeah. My own experience is that you can find GPs here, general practitioners who are more acquainted more often. But institutionally, there's still room to grow, and among the specialties. So
Definitely.
If you have specialty care like endocrinology,
Right.
or if you are looking for gynecological assistance.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I love about our resource list is we have urologists, we have gynecologists, we've got those specialties on there. Do we have everybody? No.
Yeah.
We're going to keep plugging at it. But do we have an ENT? I don't think we do. Do we have a dermatologist? No, I don't think so. But those are things that we all need
Yeah.
to access safely.